Finally, an education institution in the US has decided to stand up to Donald Trump's bullying. The hard hitting statement by Howard is something you all must read. This is brave and will inspire people not to succumb to bullying, even when the perpetrator is no less than the President of the United States of America. And the money at stake is a whopping $2.2 billion. Yes, that's what, that's how much Howard will lose if it decides to go against the bullying of Donald Trump. This is also a message to another university, such as Columbia, whose management has decided to crawl before the Trump administration by mortgaging its independence. Essentially, the heads of the US Department of Education, Department of Health and Human Services, and the General Services Administration had jointly written to Harvard last week. What did they write? The letter alleged that Harvard has in recent years failed to live up to both the intellectual and civil rights conditions that justify federal investment. Their demands included promoting faculty committed to the Trump administration's demands of Harvard, as articulated in the letter, and reducing the power of faculty and administrators more committed to activism than scholarship. Their words, not mine. Changing the admissions process to prevent admitting international students hostile to the American values. Hostile to the American values, whatever that means, including students supportive of terrorism or anti Semitism. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that this was in direct reference to those university protests against the US backed Israeli genocide in Gaza. In other words, Trump wanted Harvard to agree to his demand that no one should be allowed to raise their voice against the barbaric murder of innocent children and babies by Israeli terrorists. That's exactly it was. Going by Harvard University student enrollment data for 2024 and 2025, 27.2%, nearly 30% of the total students were those who had come from different parts of the world. In other words, international students who this administration hates and wants deported. Trump's last three demands for Harvard were changing disciplinary policies and forbidding the recognition and funding of student groups and clubs that promote criminal activity, illegal violence, or illegal harassment, implementing a comprehensive mask ban with immediate effect, serious penalties for violation, not less than suspension, after some students have protested while wearing masks, and closing all diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and offices, and carrying out organizational reform to ensure transparency with federal regulators. Now, how did Howard react? Howard President Alan M. Garber, he issued a hard-hitting statement rejecting Trump's outrageous demands. As he wrote, and I quote, the administration's prescription goes beyond the power of the federal government. It violates Howard's First Amendment rights and exceeds the statutory limits of the government's authority under Title VI. And it threatens our values as a private institution devoted to the pursuit, production, and dissemination of knowledge. No government, this is important, no government, regardless of which party is in power, should dictate what private universities can teach, whom they can admit and hire, and which areas of study and inquiry they can pursue. End quote. Reacting to Garber's letter, the White House press secretary, Caroline Levitt, she threatened to freeze more than $2.2 billion in grant to Harvard University if it did not surrender before the Trump administration.
When it comes to Harvard, the president's position on this is grounded in common sense, in the basic principle that Jewish American students, or students of any faith, should not be illegally harassed and targeted on our nation's college campuses. And we unfortunately saw that illegal discrimination take place on the campus of Harvard. There are countless examples to prove it, particularly with the stunning confession by then Harvard President Claudine Gay, who said that bullying and harassment depended on the context. The president at that time made it clear to the American public he was not going to tolerate illegal harassment and anti-Semitism taking place in violations of federal law. So the president made it clear to Harvard, follow federal law, no longer break Title VI, which was passed by Congress to ensure no student can be discriminated against on the basis of race, and you will receive federal funding. Unfortunately, Harvard has not taken the president or the administration's demands seriously. All the president is asking, don't break federal law, and then you can have your federal funding. I think the president is also begging a good question. More than $2 billion out the door to Harvard when they have a more than $50 billion endowment. Why are the American taxpayers subsidizing a university that has billions of dollars in the bank already? And we certainly should not be funding a place where such grave anti-Semitism exists.
Interestingly, the bold stand taken by Howard found plenty of takers, including former President Barack Obama. He wrote on Twitter, and I quote, Harvard has set an example for other higher ed institutions, rejecting an unlawful and ham-handed attempt to stifle academic freedom, while taking concrete steps to make sure all students at Harvard can benefit from an environment of intellectual inquiry, rigorous debate, and mutual respect. Let's hope other institutions follow suit. End quote. Harvard students have played a key role in raising their voice against the ongoing Israeli genocide in Gaza in the last 18 months. But since the US administration, regardless of who controls it, has been under complete control of Israel, student protest against the Israeli genocide has been unacceptable to the slave politicians of the US. Previously, the then Harvard president, Claudine Gay, she was summoned to the US Congress and berated by these corrupt American politicians. Trump's vile pro-Israel colleague, Elise Stefanik, had demanded her resignation.
And Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
What's the context?
Targeted as an individual, targeted at an individual.
It's targeted at Jewish students, Jewish individuals. Do you understand your testimony is dehumanizing them? Do you understand that dehumanization is part of anti-Semitism? I will ask you one more time. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric, when
and is it anti-Semitic rhetoric?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric, when it crosses into conduct that amounts to bullying, harassment, intimidation, that is actionable conduct, and we do take action.
So the answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes, and this is why you should resign. These are unacceptable answers across the board.
And because Stefanik, a Jew who was originally nominated by Trump to be the next US ambassador to the UN, had demanded her resignation, Claudine Gay had no option but to go. Now ask yourself, if anyone has to resign and face consequences for funding the genocide of hundreds of thousands of men, women, children, and babies in Gaza? No. That's how twisted and depraved these American politicians are. They're okay in sponsoring a genocide, but they will not tolerate peaceful protest on university campuses just because they show a rogue regime of a foreign entity in a poor light. In recent days, Colombia has been willingly cooperating with the Trump administration in the harassment of its students who previously protested against Israel. Yes, this is New America, where criticizing the US government wouldn't land you in any kind of trouble. But criticizing the rogue regime of the settler colony of Israel will get you deported. Why? because that rogue regime of a foreign entity has enslaved your politicians. You are deluded to think that the US is a free country anymore. That's it from me. Thank you very much for your support of this platform and our journalism on buymeacoffee.com and Patreon. If you too think that our journalism is worth supporting, then you too should consider becoming part of it. Details are there in the description of this video. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.